I don't think I'll ever forget the summer we moved to Cedar Hollow. It was supposed to be a fresh start for my family, a chance to leave the chaos of the city behind and build a new life in the countryside. For a while, it was beautiful, peaceful even. But sometimes I wonder if we were drawn there for a reason, like moths to a flame. There's a part of me that wishes we'd never found that well, but I suppose it was always waiting for us. My name is Kevin. I'd lived in New York my whole life, and while it wasn't always easy, it was home. When we first moved to Cedar Hollow, it was just the four of us. My dad, Jack, was the kind of guy who could fix anything with his hands, whether it was a leaky roof or a broken heart. He always had a quiet strength about him, the kind that made us feel safe. My mom, Laura, was the dreamer of the family. She had this way of turning even the simplest moments into something special, a picnic under the stars, or a game night in the living room. She was the glue that held us together, or at least, she used to be. My sister, Abby, was 16 then, and in that phase where she thought she was smarter than everyone else. To be honest, she probably was. She was always buried in a book or sketching something in her notebook, trying to figure out who she was and where she belonged. And then there was me, Kevin, the youngest. I was 12 and full of questions, always poking around where I didn't belong, always looking for the next adventure. So we packed up our lives into a moving truck and left the bustling city for Cedar Hollow. Cedar Hollow wasn't exactly what you'd call exciting. It was the kind of place that barely existed on a map. Just a handful of houses scattered across miles of rolling hills, dense woods, and fields that stretched endlessly into the horizon. The kind of town where the days dragged on and the nights were eerily silent. When we pulled into the long gravel driveway leading to our new house, I immediately felt the weight of regret. The farmhouse wasn't the picturesque country home you'd see in magazines. It was old, worn down, and tired. The white paint was peeling off in long strips, and the roof sagged as if it carried the burden of time. Dad called it rustic. I called it a dump. There was, however, one thing I liked: the swing. It hung from a massive oak tree in the front yard, its ropes weathered but sturdy. I imagined myself spending hours on that swing, flying high above the ground, pretending I was anywhere but here. And then there was the well. The well sat about 20 feet from the house, hidden amidst tall wild grass and weeds. Its stones were ancient, covered in moss, and its wooden lid looked like it could splinter at any moment. There was something about it that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way it seemed out of place, as though it didn't belong in this world. Dad barely noticed it. "We won't need that," he said. "There's a creek nearby for water." But I couldn't shake the feeling that the well was watching me. Our first week in Cedar Hollow was uneventful. We spent our days unpacking boxes and trying to make the old farmhouse livable. Then, one afternoon, our nearest neighbor, Hank, showed up. Hank was an older man, probably in his 60s. He had a wiry frame, tanned skin from years of working under the sun, and eyes that carried stories I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a deep, gravelly voice. As we chatted, his gaze drifted to the well. His kind expression darkened, and he crossed his arms. "Y'all best leave that thing alone," he said, his tone grave. "Why's that?" Dad asked, raising an eyebrow. Hank hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That well's been here longer than anyone can remember. Folks around here say it's cursed. Grant's wish, sure, but it always takes something in return. Ain't worth the risk." Dad laughed it off, brushing aside Hank's warning. "Thanks, but we'll be fine," he said. Hank didn't argue. He just gave the well one last wary glance before walking back to his truck. But his words stayed with me. It wasn't long before things started going wrong. Dad had dreams of turning the rocky, stubborn soil into a thriving garden. He spent hours digging, planting, and watering, but nothing grew. The crops withered before they had a chance to bloom. Mom was worried. She tried to hide it, but I could see it in the way she nervously folded her hands and glanced at the bills piling up on the kitchen table. Dad grew distant, his frustration building with every failed attempt to make things work. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside. Peeking through the window, I saw Mom standing by the well. She was clutching a small jar in her hands, our emergency stash of coins. "Mom?" I called out, stepping onto the porch. She jumped, startled, and quickly hid the jar behind her back. "It's nothing," she said, her voice shaky. "Go back to bed." The next morning, everything changed. The crops that had been withering were suddenly lush and green. The chickens, which had stopped laying eggs, were now producing more than ever. Dad said it was a stroke of good luck, but I couldn't ignore the unease settling in my chest. As the weeks passed, strange things began happening. One night, Max, our dog, disappeared without a trace. Dad said it was probably coyotes, but I wasn't so sure. Then the chickens started dying. We'd find them in the coop, their necks twisted at unnatural angles. Dad tried to act like it was no big deal, but I could see the worry etched into his face. Mom, on the other hand, had changed. She was quieter, more distant. I often found her standing by the window, staring at the well with a vacant expression. One evening, I heard her whispering. Sneaking closer, I saw her toss something into the well. The glint of metal in the moonlight made my stomach drop. Not long after, Dad got sick. It started as a cough but quickly became something worse. He was bedridden, pale, and feverish. The local doctor couldn't figure out what was wrong. Mom was desperate. She spent hours outside by the well, her whispers growing more frantic. Then one morning, Dad was suddenly better. It was as if his illness had never happened. But something was missing. Mom's wedding ring. The night everything fell apart is burned into my memory. I woke to the sound of sobbing and found Mom outside, holding my sister Abby. They were standing by the well. "What are you doing?" I yelled. Mom's voice was trembling. "She's the only way," she said. "The well wants her." "No!" I screamed, running toward her. Dad burst out of the house, grabbing Mom and pulling her away from Abby. They struggled, and in the chaos, Mom slipped. She tumbled backward into the well, her scream echoing into the depths, and I'll never forget the way it listened. We left Cedar Hollow the next morning. We didn't pack much, just what we could grab quickly. The house, the land, the cursed well, we left it all behind. Dad didn't speak much during the drive, and Abby didn't speak for weeks. To this day, I don't know what Mom whispered to the well or what it took from her in return. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear her voice. Soft, desperate, rising from the depths. And I'll never forget the way it sounded. Miss you, Mom. We left Cedar Hollow the next morning. We didn't pack much, just what we could grab quickly. The house, the land, the cursed well, we left it all behind. Dad didn't speak much during the drive, and Abby didn't speak for weeks. To this day, I don't know what Mom whispered to the well or what it took from her in return. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear her voice. Soft, desperate, rising from the depths. And I'll never forget the way it sounded. Miss you, Mom.